Hi, this is FM Alisa Melekhina. Welcome to my latest full-length video for onlinechesslessons.net. My first DVD and several shorter videos were on openings, the King's Indian Defense and C3 Sicilian. However, I wanted to make a more universal video. The topic I'll be covering is converting advantages, which is something that players of all strengths have problems with. Problems with converting advantages are especially amplified if you don't have time to train your chess, if you're in school or working full-time. In fact, in my recent article for Chess Life Online, I talk about how my results in chess have declined since I started law school. Not because I wasn't studying, but I wasn't playing as often and experienced difficulties in converting advantages. Initially, the problem every time I lost a game due to a failed conversion was that I blamed it on time trouble or miscalculation. Well, these are very general reasons that don't get to the root of the problem. So I decided to take a thorough look at my recent games and analyze exactly what went wrong at the critical moments. Unsurprisingly, I found that the reasons I kept missing the wins were much deeper than I originally thought. Interestingly, I found that not all of the failed conversions were the same. I came across 3 different patterns that I will cover in this DVD. In the first case, there were simply too many possibilities to win. That sounds like a good problem to have, but in practice it can cause a player to avoid the more complex line and go for the one that is easier to calculate. After several moves of doing that, the advantage eventually fizzles out. The second case is similar. I was dismissing lines without concrete forced endings. And in the third and final scenario I will be discussing, I found that I focused on the same plan so much that an alternate winning line didn't even occur to me. To demonstrate all of these in action, I have chosen a total of 9 of my own games. I'll use 3 for each case, which are 1, too many winning possibilities, 2, rejecting lines without concrete endings, and 3, failing to refocus. If you have found that you are failing to win winning positions, these examples will be useful for you. Now, there's no one right answer on how to solve this problem of failing to convert advantages, and the solution will vary from player to player. However, I hope that by closely inspecting my own games, you will be inspired to do the same with your games, and will be able to extract some patterns that you can address. I have chosen to go over my own games because I can tell you what I was thinking during the game and why I deviated from the correct path. Converting advantages is a skill that you have to learn rather than memorize like an opening, but the first step is awareness, which is what this video is designed to instill. This video also differs from others in that it is more interactive. At many points throughout the examples, I will encourage you to take a moment to think about what move you would play. At those points, you should pause the video and give yourself a good 15 minutes or so to try to calculate all of the main variations. Don't stop until you've exhausted your calculation. Sustained calculation will help you win more games. It could be useful for you to record all of the lines on the score sheet as you would in a real game to get in the habit of calculating hard during your own games. At that point, resume the video and compare your notes with my explanations. To this end, it may be helpful for you to follow along with your own physical chessboard. Okay, let's get started with the first theme of how to play when there are too many winning possibilities. These games usually have crazy tactics. If you've noticed the position that I have up right now, it's very full of tactics, very rich in possibilities. And that's especially true when facing my opponent from this first example, who is none other than GM Alex Shabalov. I think I've played him more than any other player in over-the-board tournament games, and this game occurred at the 2011 Canadian Open in July, just a few weeks after my win over him in the C3 Sicilian, which I covered in my first OCL video. He definitely wanted revenge, and he was really close because I had a depressing position out of the opening, but after he pushed too hard, I ended up with the advantage again. In this position, I'm black. So let's see how it got to this point. He is white, and we start with a Scotch defense. the knight f6 line. So far this is all theory, but here Shabalov surprises me with f4 on move 10. And probably the best way to play here would have been to continue with bishop b4. And he can't go f5 here because I can simply take the pawn, but I got worried about f5 because my queen would run out of squares very quickly. So I went g6 here and decided to fianchetto my bishop and play on the long diagonal, which is another theme in this opening. Now I go d6 because I'm pinning the king, so it's a good time to put pressure on the e5 pawn. But he has a new way of developing his pieces. So even though I've managed to capture the pawn, it actually hurts my position more than it helps me because now white can control the e-file where both my king and queen are still remaining. I end up developing my bishop this way even though I fianchetted. Now the problem if I castle is he can go f5. So I don't want to take, and if I move back with the queen, then he can sacrifice on g6. And this is not good for me. So I end up going f5 here, which temporarily stops his plan, but does open up my own king. I let him recapture the pawn and I castle. Instead of being up a pawn, I gave him an isolated pawn. Now he's managed to accelerate his development. All of his pieces are out very quickly. Now I'm faced with the choice of where to move my rook. I decide on rook f7. It looks unnatural, but it does protect the 7th rank and f5 pawn. I see he is about to put more pressure on that. Now white's pieces are completely developed, but in the meantime mine are cramped on the queen side, and it's hard for me to move the bishop on c8 somewhere effective. I go bishop a6 to try to put some pressure on the c4 pawn, but I can't really follow up with that. Now he wants to swing that knight to f4 to go e6 and slowly gain space. This is as good a time as ever to capture on e5, but it's a decent pawn sack. Okay, now I go queen d6, which looks like it's the right place to move the queen, but he can actually win a piece here. So this is going to be the first point in the DVD where I'm going to ask you to pause the video and take a moment from white's point of view, from my opponent's point of view, consider how you would proceed here for white to convert the opening advantage that he has. The correct answer here is b4. Now it looks like white is just giving up the pawn because both the bishop and queen are attacking it, but after I take he can go c5 and unleash this amazing discovery on both the bishop and the queen. Again, my pieces are very loose. It probably would have been better to go a5 before bishop a6. So after I capture, he can take. It's a piece for 3 pawns, but white is obviously better. My pawns are doubled and isolated, and they won't get far. Now I'm sure Shabalov saw this, but he probably thought he could get a better version of this. So on move 20, instead of b4, he went a3 to prepare b4. But this gives me just enough time to step back with my queen, so that now, after b4, I can move back to either d6 or bishop f8. Now after c5, I can take the knight. The bishop is hanging, and I'm the one who ends up working him. And if he takes on a6, then I can take his bishop on h6, which is suddenly a target. And I am in pretty good shape here, being 2 pawns up. So he can no longer go b4, and I can also probably go bishop f8 here. After he takes, he can go knight e6, threatening knight c5. He can't go c5 immediately because I can take on d3, threatening his queen, which counters the discovery. So he goes knight e6, attacks the rook, and threatens knight c5 at the same time. So this would be the way to continue here. But instead of bishop f8, I can go bishop d6. And I'm okay. So instead of that, he decided to go knight e6 immediately. Now if I go bishop d6, he can go c5, because the pawn on c5 is now protected, and if I take on c5, he can take back with the knight, which ends up protecting his queen. So instead, I go bishop e7. I'm still hanging on. He had an opportunity to convert the advantage immediately with b4, but he probably rejected that line because it didn't have a concrete forced ending, which is the second category I'll go over after the first set of my 3 games. Okay, now he goes rook e3. He probably wants to double up on the e file here. And I go c5, finally plugging that c5 discovery threat. Okay, now take a short moment here. You don't have to pause the video at this moment, but just think about where you would go if you're white here. How would you continue the attack? I bet none of you will play the move that Shabalov played here. He played the amazing rook takes f5. Probably the more natural move here is rook d1, putting pressure on the d file, threatening a discovery, making my pieces go to awkward squares. But rook takes f5. This is a very daring rook sacrifice, typical of Shabalov, and comes as a big surprise in this position. It is a bit radical. You may have still been fuming after our last encounter and really wanted to pay me back, and if this sacrifice had worked, he would have been justified. So of course, from my point of view, I spent a lot of time in the opening trying to maneuver my way around the c5 discoveries and hold on. So this move really took me aback, and especially when you're faced with a move like this played by a strong GM, you immediately think everything is going to come crashing down. But in these types of sacrifices, usually the opponent has only just the only moves they can make in the position. So with me, I'm making the moves that I have to make here because I have no other alternatives. So that makes my job easier. Because after rook takes f5, I can take it, because if I don't, then white is definitely already winning. And I'm going to see how he's going to follow up. So he goes rook g3, which is probably why he went rook e3 instead of planning to double on the e file. Go king h8. And now if he goes bishop g7, I can recapture the bishop. I don't go to king g8 and allow him to discover a check there. I go f4 here, and he's forced to move the rook somewhere, and I win the knight back. So, see, the rook on f7 actually came in useful. I did have an intuition that protecting the 7th rank would be necessary, but I didn't imagine it happening in a situation like this. So instead he took on f5, and now he has a pawn for the rook, and the sacrifice so far is not taking off, but there still are some threats that I have to be wary of. So particularly the knight on e6 is very strong. The bishop is threatening to come to g7, and then he may be able to take on h7 with a check. So I have to do something about that knight. So now think about how you would defend this position if you're black here while holding on to the advantage. There are several ways of doing that here. Okay, so first of all, if I don't do anything, if I go bishop takes c4, which is probably what he calculated, then he can check me. Do this. And if I capture, he takes with the rook, and then takes on h7 with the rook, threatening checkmate, and I have to sacrifice the queen to avoid the checkmate. So I definitely don't want to do something like that. One good way of defending would be rook g8, bringing the other rook in and providing more protection for the g7 square. Now if he checks me, I can take the bishop with my rook. And I'm up a bishop, and I will win back the c4 pawn next move. So this would have been the correct way of defending. I found the second best way. I'm still better, but it's not as good as I could have been because I decide to exchange the rook for the knight instead of the dark squared bishop. It's less than an optimal decision. Now if he checks me, I can still take. And because my rook is on d8, now I have this checkmate here. So that's the plan after rook d8, but he's forced to capture on d8 here. I take back. And now if he ever goes queen c3, I can go bishop f6. That's an effective defense, and I can't do anything immediate. He doesn't want me to put my bishop on that diagonal immediately. He wants to preserve that threat. Remember, the threat is stronger than the execution here. But there's really not much he can do. Actually, one of the better moves he can make in this position is b3 to just protect that c4 pawn and make it more difficult for my pieces to disentangle themselves. But he goes h3, which is a natural move to make to prevent me from back rank checkmating him just in case. This gives me the opportunity to take on c4, and my pieces are finally freed. Now he goes b3. And I could move the bishop back, but now I'm on the offensive. I go queen d6, and I take the chance to activate my pieces. He goes queen c3 check, which checks and defends the rook at the same time. I go bishop f6. And now he's faced with the decision of where to move the queen. Queen e1 would have been more accurate here, but instead he goes queen f3, and we come to the position that was up at the beginning of my talk. So this is another critical moment of the game. I'm already much better here, and think about how you would proceed here if you're black. I went bishop e5, I'm attacking the rook, and now h3 doesn't seem as useful because the king can't escape to h2 in case the move rooks away. And I'm also pinning the bishop on f5 and attacking the bishop on h6 with my queen. So now all of his pieces are hanging. And instead of moving the rook back, he plays the tricky queen e4. Now I made it this far and I'm minus 11 here, if you can believe that. But I need to play accurately in order to convert this advantage. So how should black win here? Okay, the problem was that I was in severe time trouble here because I was so much worse in the opening. So I played the quick natural move in this position, which was queen d1 check. Still better here, but this was not the way to preserve my minus 11 advantage. I had several ways of converting the advantage here. Okay, one method was going bishop d5, and if he goes queen e2, then I take on f5. Very simple. If he takes on h7, then I can simply check, take. And if he goes queen d3 here, I can't go bishop takes g2 check because the queen on d3 is defended. But then I can go bishop takes g3. So I should have just continued with putting pressure on the queen and continuing to attack his queen instead of checking first. Because after I check on d1, he goes king h2. I can't go bishop d5 anymore. Now the bishop on e5 is hanging. That was one way. Another way would have been to take on g3 here. And this leads to a simplified one with less of an advantage, but the win is at least forced. He has to check, and this is what I was worried about, but it's not mate here. I can go rook f8. He takes with the queen. No, I'm just simply up a knight here. And if he takes with the bishop, then check on d1, he has to go queen e1 check to stop the checkmate. So he would have taken with the queen. And even though there's no mate here, this is clearly an advantage that is easily convertible. So because I had so many possibilities of continuing here and winning here, and after tournament games you may hear some players saying, oh, I had so many wins in my position, but I ended up blundering, I ended up letting go. It may have been a position like this, and having so many wins is a blessing and a curse at the same time because you're not really sure where to go. So you end up going for a simple, almost knee-jerk move like queen d1 check. And it looks like a good move because I'm checking him. I know where he's going to go next. He's going to king h2, and then I can take on g3 with a check. And that's what I wanted, right? He has no queen e8 check in the meantime. But if instead I stopped and I thought about my alternatives here, I maybe would have found the clear-cut win. So this was the critical converting advantage moment. And in your games, I want you to recognize all of the possibilities you have in the position. Even if it seems like you're dead winning, your opponent may still have a saving grace, so don't let your guard down at any moment. That's the important takeaway from this game. Because look what happened. So he takes on g3. And I'm still up a rook. Pawns are even now. Okay, and again, I have another opportunity to convert my advantage more decisively. Okay, the correct move here, again, was bishop d5. It's an uncomfortable move to make, especially this is move 34, so time is running out, because he can go queen e8 check, but then I can go queen f8, and the problem in this position is that both my queen and bishop are attacked, so this would have been a neat way to get both of them out of the line of fire. And the bishop on d5 is defended by that knight on b6, so you can't do anything there. If he goes queen d3, I go queen f6, and either the f5 or the f4 bishop is going to get captured. Queen e3, I can go queen e7, simply keep my extra rook. And if he takes the queen, check on g7 first, and then take on d6 instead of taking the queen first because it's pinned, and then I come away with an extra piece. Okay, so bishop d5 was correct. Instead, I again play the simple move, which is a check. Now, you have to be careful. If you ever get to the point where you have a serious advantage, the opponent's king may be exposed, and then you'll have the opportunity for a lot of checks. But check is not the same as checkmate. So you have to make sure that by giving your opponent a check, you're not actually just allowing him to escape to a more convenient square for him instead of you. Sometimes it may be better for you if the position is preserved the way it is. Because after king h2, if I go bishop d5 now he goes queen e8 check, and I can't cover on f8 with the queen. I have to cover with either the bishop or the rook, and then he captures my queen on d6, and that's no longer an option. So again, another missed instance to convert the advantage. So instead I go queen d5. He takes on c4, and I exchange the queen, which I am happy about, but I exchanged at the price of giving up my clear rook for being simply up in exchange. I at least get the pawn on c4, so I think I'm in good shape here, and I'm about to promote one of the pawns. I have the exchange and a pawn. Now I have two pawns, but I have two pawns at the price of allowing him to win back the exchange, because he can pin the rook at any moment, and I thought that's what he would do. But if he had went bishop e5 immediately, I would have simply just started promoting the pawn. So he attacks my pawn first, and this is my move 39, so it's very hard to find the more accurate way to play here. And now we've come to an endgame, which is also important for converting advantages. So take a moment here to think about the best way to proceed for black. The gut reaction move here is c4, which is what I went. But my last chance to win here would have been knight c2. If he takes on c5, he can go rook g5. He can no longer go bishop d4. So he has to go back to f4, and this gives me enough time to go a5 and divert his bishop, keep my exchange and the extra pawn. So knight c2 would have been the right move. Instead I go c4. And I thought he would go bishop d4 here. This is what I was counting on. But again, you have to look for all options that your opponent has, because after bishop d4, I can go knight c2 now. And if he takes, this is what I was counting on, because I can simply promote my pawns. Now, here's a nice endgame calculation exercise for you. How would you win here? If you go c5, then he can start bringing his king in. This is still winning, but it's not as effective as the move knight e2, cutting off the king, and focusing on the a pawn instead of the c pawn, which is farther away from the king. Okay, but that didn't happen. He didn't go bishop d4. Instead, he went bishop c5. Interesting move. It diverts my knight. Okay, this is move 40, and again, probably my last real chance to preserve my advantage and win the game. I know I said that last move that it was the last chance, but this is really the last chance. So give it, one good last thing. How would you win here for black? The correct move here is c6. I really need to divert the bishops from those posts because I can't do anything with my rook. If he takes on c6, go rook c7, and I'm free. I can keep the exchange. If he goes bishop e6, then I can go knight b5. And because my knight is protected on b5, because the pawn is on c6, I can go rook d7 and again escape from giving back the exchange. But instead I go rook g5. This is move 40, so I play, again, the simple move among other winning possibilities because it's easier to calculate. I know what his next move has to be. It has to be bishop d4, so I know I'm going to protect the knight this way. And it's a fine way to think short term, but if you want to convert a long-term advantage, this type of thinking is unacceptable. So in your games, I want you to always think of the long-term advantage conversion. Now I go back to g7, and I think he's going to go back to c5. So my plan was, okay, now we're past the time control. If he goes back to c5, now I can think about it longer. Is c6 really the right move? But I give him the chance to go bishop b2 here. He attacks the knight this way. Now I go knight b5 because if I go knight c2, then the knight may get trapped. He takes on c4, attacks the knight. I lost my valuable c4 pawn. I'm still better, but I'm only -1 compared to the great advantage I had before, and my material advantage is subsiding. The best way to continue would have been to go c6, try and promote the pawns this way, and it takes a while to extricate my rook from everything, but his king is coming in closer. So I go knight d6 because I want to attack his bishop, make him finally show his hand and exchange my rook, but he waits until the last moment to take the rook until I'm finally able to free my king. And if I don't do this h6, king h7 maneuver, then no, my rook is always stuck and I can't cover his bishop anyway. So he gets some extra moves to get his pieces out. And now the dust has settled and I'm only up a pawn, and unfortunately it's just not enough to win, especially against the Grandmaster. So if you're interested in seeing how this game ended, try and do what I can by pushing the pawns. I went knight e5 here. A better try would have been knight b6. But he's coming in for the pawn, so I go knight e5. And knight e5 is a good square because as long as I keep my knight there, I pretty much guarantee myself a draw, right? Because he can only go g6 to make progress. I can always sacrifice my knight. So it's a good practical safe move. Now if I had a bishop here, I may have been able to promote the pawns, but I just can't make any progress here. So I win the g5 pawn, he takes the a3 pawn. And the game ends in a draw this way. Okay, this game had a lot of interesting lessons, a lot of critical points, and I'm disappointed I wasn't able to score another win against Shabalov, but one win in my career against him is still good, and I came away learning a lot from this game. And now this game, it was absolute mayhem. Lots of tactics, a lot of crazy wins, long variations here and there.
This is Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for onlinechesslessons.net. First of all, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you would like to receive more free chess videos from us, you can just click the subscribe button below. I would also highly recommend signing up for my free mail course, the 10 Grandmaster Secrets to Dominate Chess. During this exclusive course from onlinechesslessons.net, I'll share with you my own Grandmaster shortcuts to effective attacking, defending, and growth hacks to improving your chess without complicated books or memorization. So sign up by clicking the sidebar on the right, and I know you won't be disappointed. Once more, this is Damian for onlinechesslessons.net, and I'll see you in my videos. Thank you.